Hey folks, Kevin here. Well, it's September 11th, 2019. This is an update on the progress we've made recently in the greenhouse. In the last video I posted, I went over installing the louvers or the vents, these awnings that open and close, but I hadn't installed the apparatuses that mechanically open and close the systems. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. So this is a recap. This is a 1970 built aluminum glass greenhouse that is in two sections, that is almost 70 feet long and 32 feet wide. We built it on top of a large thermal masses, large banks to hold the energy during the winter months. And so insulation and ventilation are so, airflow and maintaining a proper environment inside of the greenhouse is so important. You can see back here in the back here, I've installed one of the original crank assemblies that open and close the side vents. The roof vents originally had electric motors. There were Mark II series electric motors with gear reduction systems that turn pipes that actually facilitate operating a rack and pinion system, and I'll do a little bit of a close-up of some of the rack and pinion systems, and that's what controlled the upper vents. Now those were 50 years old or 49 years old and left in a state of disrepair. The electric motors, I've tested them. We have three of the motors. One of the motors must have given out, and they put in a hand crank system for the fourth upper vent. So it's two zones, two sections of this greenhouse, each half of it rather, and then each side has an awning that opens up, the awning vent. So only three motors still exist. They do work, but they're 50 years old, and the controlling systems on it, I really have to think about if I'm going to be using those again. But right now I'm in search of getting some new motors for operating the roof vents. They're quite expensive, $1,500 a piece, and that's just the motor and the gear reduction. Then you need some controllers to control those, and then you need potentially for full automation system like this is ultimately going to be, you need a whole panel system as well. And I'll go over those things in future videos as I get to them. But the expense and the slowness of me working by myself, these things all slow us down as time goes on. So one of the systems, so there's two different types of operating systems, and there's this 1 3/8 inch pipe that runs around down each side and on each side of the roof vents as well. And they're two different systems. So this is not a rack and pinion system. This is actually an arm and a rod system. And this crank here, this hand crank, it isn't ideal because I'd really like to be able to control if there's a sudden kick up in high winds. I want to close these windows down. If there's a change in temperature or a drastic change in temperature, I'd really like those to be automated, and I don't have to be in the building. I can be wherever else working on other things. But for right now, since it's such an expensive endeavor putting in the electric motors and all, for right now I reinstalled these hand crank systems. These are installed upside down, and these are cast iron, and when I took the system apart I couldn't budget. I had to use torches, hammers, and a press in order to get things broken down without damaging them, so that I could break free the mechanics of it. And it was left in a state of a lack of use, is what I think is what had happened with these apparatuses. So part of it has a gear that's attached to the pipe that turns the arms and rods that open the louvers, and I'll demonstrate that in a moment. And then you have a crank with another gear up here. Now these systems, these are installed upside down because this upper part, which is a dome part, actually is a cup part where you're supposed to put grease in there. But what ends up happening in the greenhouse setting is humidity, condensation ends up getting in there, and that's one of the things that I saw. Moisture had gathered in there, and so the whole thing had rusted and seized up. So I elected, and I did this wrong first, I installed them correctly all the way around, and then I looked at them. Fortunately, we got a little bit of rain since there isn't a roof on it. They've completely filled up with water, and we're already starting to rust. So I went ahead and disassembled it again, put them all back up, and they work pretty well. So the crank system, these systems work pretty darn well. And what I'll do is either use some WD-40 or use some lithium grease on this to lubricate these systems. It really doesn't need much grease. You don't need to have a big pool of grease there. And I really don't like the idea of, on the top of the grease, water pooling from condensation and humidity inside the greenhouse. Now we want to be controlling that in the future, and I'll make future videos about that. But the arm attaches to the pipe, and the rod attaches to the vent itself. And I'll be putting seals in between where the glass vent comes down, and seals to this lower section as well. And it makes a pretty nice attachment. So there's 4 of these, one on the east and west side of this most southern zone of the greenhouse, and then one on either side of the shorter southern zone as well. So I'm going to go ahead and put on my helmet cam and show you a little bit of the rack and pinion system from this point on. So I'm up here on the roof area where the vents were previously installed. Again, these are aluminum frame system. That glass is going to be installed on top of it. The rest of it's going to have Solex down for glazing material. But I think I'm going to put glass up here. I'm not absolutely positive yet. And this is the ridge piece of the peak, and it articulates with the vent system here, sort of like a snail curlicue. And so this opens up in this direction, and the rack and pinion system, which is mounted on the rods here, is actually responsible. So this is the coupler attaching to 2 rods. Here's a straight rack right here, and a pinion on a 1 3/8 or 1 5/16 outside diameter pipe. And once a motor is attached right over there, about center of the entire span of each zone. So each zone has 2 sides to the roof vents. It has 2 roof vents, one on each side of the ridge. And in the center of the span is where we mount the electric motors, so there's less wear and tear on the units. And when the motor is installed, what will happen is it will turn the pipe, rotate this pipe, and as you can see, the roof vent actually opens up. And it won't go much higher than that, because at this end I have the overhang from the work area that and I'm having a hard time turning this right now anymore. Oh, I have the lock on it. So we don't want it to go much higher than this, and I think it will give us adequate ventilation. But 2 things: the snow will overhang and get on this, because the wind comes out of the west and you get large snow caps. And I didn't want to build this overhang higher than what it is, and the main reason for that, maybe I could have gone another 6 inches, because the snow accumulation is absolutely amazing here. And if we have this roof being much higher, the overhang being much higher, when that breaks free during the mid of the winter, and I don't really want to be getting up on here during the winter months, that massive amount of snow, and it could be 3 foot thick compressed consolidated snow, and that could come crashing down and do damage to either the Solex or to the glass structure. I'll be placing a seal in between these 2 areas to try and decrease airflow and heat loss from this section as well. There were a few other things that I was able to accomplish over the last couple of weeks, and that's some of the small aluminum caps that join each of the sections, from the sill plate that sits on top of the concrete to each one of the lateral lines, the longitudinal lines that you see. Each piece of metal has a small cap piece from the peak or from the ridge all the way down, and I was able to get those all cleaned up and get them attached as well. So it's a long process going through all this, and at some point in time I'll try and make a video about what the plans are for the whole automation, where we're monitoring the temperatures of the water totes that are in the thermal mass unit to the rock beds, the efficiency of heat penetration to the different zones of the rock beds as well, by using a pull versus a push fan system for the thermal mass units. Looking at humidity and temperature control directly over the plants, so we can get real-time accurate information that isn't being impacted by the sunlight that's coming down and hitting those thermal probes as well. So there's so many things that we want to control, but initially being able to keep the greenhouse so that the plants within the greenhouse don't have a heat shock and get burnt or fried as a result of the vents not being open during a high temperate area where we're getting lots of solar radiation coming in, and also to keep the plants from freezing and getting all the heat to escape from the thermal mass down below out those vents when the sun disappears and the temperature drops as well, so that I don't have to be in here, as well as many other things with watering systems, misting systems, ventilation systems. All of those things I'll talk about in future videos. So if you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. If you thought this video was of value, please give us a thumbs up. We really appreciate it. Share the video if you think it's of value. And by all means, folks, have a safe and great day. Bye-bye now.